Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Mikkel Thorpe. This is the Expat Money Show, and today's guest does language acquisition and goal achievement coaching. She currently uses 8 languages, including English, German, French, Mandarin, Japanese, Spanish, Hindi, and Arabic. And she holds graduate degrees in German literature and secondary instruction. But most impressive is that she is a mother to an adventurous toddler with whom she speaks 6 of these languages. Dear God. I'm excited to talk about multilingual parenting and hear all of her tips and tricks for expat families. So I am really, really excited about today's show. Please welcome Sarah Tarvin. Sarah, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much. How are you doing today?
Very well. Now, okay, before we get into your backstory, and everybody who listens to this show, I always ask about the backstory. Before we get into that, all those languages that I just mentioned, do you actually speak all of those languages, or are you just like talk about those languages? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. So I generally use, when I'm talking about languages, I use the European Common Framework. I don't know if you're familiar, but that's when you see like the A1, A2, etc. So of course, I'm at different levels with each of them.
Okay.
When I say that I speak 8 languages, so I've actually studied or attempted probably closer to like 24 languages.
Oh, wow.
But most of the rest of those are things that I've learned for travel. And so like I learned the basics to get around, but it's not something that I'm not worried about the grammar. I'm not actively trying to acquire it. So those 8 languages are the languages that I actively work with. Ranging from native speaker or near native speaker fluency to, my Arabic. Arabic has been the most difficult one for me. So it's, it kind of has its, I'll get a little better.
Yalla habibi.
Exactly. Yalla habibi. So I'm not fluent in all of them, but those are the ones that I actively work with and try to advance on a regular basis.
Well, I had to ask you that before anything else, because I think it's super interesting. We can get into possibly a conversation about what is fluency, what does that mean, and things like that a little bit later on. But I suppose right off the bat, so how did you get into languages so much? Like, where did this passion come from?
Yeah, basically it's a lifelong passion. I can't remember a time that I wasn't interested. I remember a moment in childhood. I would say I was about 7 years old, and I was part of one of those little, gifted and talented programs in I was small town Nebraska. I was a kind of a suburb, the military suburb outside of Omaha, and they put me in a program that was I think it was in the school, or not the school library, the community library. It was after school. And they basically were introducing us to the idea that there were other countries. And so we went after school, and they had these, we made these little folders out of manila folders. They put little stamps on them, a little handle, and that was our suitcase, right? And then each day of the program is like a week-long program. We went to a different country. And so we went to France and Spain and Germany. And so they would have like themed snacks from each country. And we'd watch a little, it was in the 80s, a little VHS about the country. And then they would teach us that in Spain, they say hola. And in France, they say bonjour for, greetings. And this just blew my mind, because I was like, hold on. Hello. So what do you want about this hola nonsense? And so when I realized that there were entirely different languages out there that opened the door to these other cool places that were, interesting and beyond the borders of my small town, I just was immediately hooked. I could not get enough of it. It was like being a spy with a secret code. And so I became very interested. That was the moment that really turned me on both to travel, which has become a lifelong passion, and then also the languages. And so around that same time, I was a hyperactive kid. I needed to be into everything. And so my parents found me a local woman who happened to be French. And she would just allow kids, it was French tutoring, but basically what it was once a week for a couple of hours, I'd go to her house and we'd play in French. And so that's how I started learning French. And after that, I just, one was not enough. So I just kept going.
Well, okay. So side note, before we get into the methodology, I think, and I'm curious your opinion,
Mhm.
but it sounds to me like that is the exact way that you should learn a language, through
Oh, absolutely.
play, through something that you enjoy, something fun, and uh, making a connection with another human being, opposed to what is done in traditional schools, where you pull out a textbook and someone lectures at you and you are corrected for every mistake that you make, and it's very dry.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
I
probably
can't
hear a lot of the bias in my tonality, but I mean,
it matches mine. I couldn't agree more. That's exactly the right way to do it. Yeah.
mhm. Okay, so French was the first one
Mhm.
on your list. Now, did you gravitate after that to additional Romance languages, or because like I saw in there like Japanese and Mandarin and Hindi and
Mhm.
Arabic, like ones that are just completely different.
Yeah.
Did you go more to the Romance languages and then
Mhm.
afterwards be like, ooh, I need more of a challenge? Or how did that look?
How that happened? Yeah. So in the early years, some of it was dictated by my geographic location. So
Sure.
in small town Nebraska, at the time, and things are probably different today, but in the 80s, there wasn't a whole lot of language availability. And then I moved shortly thereafter to St. Louis, where there were more. Let's see, the next, so in middle school, because again, especially back then, there were not immersion schools. We weren't doing au pairs or, non-native English speaker nannies. So it was just a little harder to come across language opportunities at that time. And so I had to wait with great anticipation until I got to middle school to start taking it at school. And then they had what was called like a language wheel class where you could sample all of the foreign languages offered as like a semester long elective. And so I took that, and it was the French, German, Spanish, and then like for 1 week you got ASL. And the purpose of it was really meant to, you were supposed to choose like which one connects with
You're
me, and I
like,
was like,
yes.
all of them, yes. And I was just
The answer is
furious.
yes.
Yes, I was so angry that you could only have like one or two electives, to choose from. And so I stuck with French at that time, and then we moved down to Arkansas. And so at that time, and it's been a while since I've lived down there, but at that time, the native Spanish speaking population was just growing so
Mhm.
quickly. And so while I was there, I would say it was probably between 30 and 40% of the community I was in was native Spanish speaker. Um, and so our school was increasingly working with that. So all of the announcements were bilingual, all of the papers home, everything like that was bilingual. In the hallways, I was as likely to hear Spanish as I was to hear English. So Spanish was kind of the next one by default, simply because that became my community.
Mhm.
It's one of the ones that I've studied, quote unquote, studied the least. I only took in school, I took Spanish. I started Spanish 1, like my junior year of high school, I think. And because of my experience with the other language um, and my interest in languages, they actually skipped me to Spanish 2 for the second semester, because I was, they're so similar. I was just,
Mhm.
you know, getting bored and wasting the teacher's time. So he moved me to the second level. So that's where my Spanish comes from. My productive Spanish is not as good as my receptive Spanish. I can read, I can understand Spanish just really pretty easily. I have a harder time speaking it just because I haven't tried to as much. I've not traveled in the Spanish speaking countries as much. And so, but as far as understanding goes, that one is, yeah, and accent wise, I've been told that my accent is pretty decent as well, simply because it was a full immersion experience. Following that one, then our school actually, for small town Arkansas, had an amazing exchange student population. We had like 21 exchange students my sophomore year. One of them initially lived with another host family, and he was the most popular boy in school, really just this attractive, well-spoken, outgoing German guy. And his host family made him miserable. And so he asked me one day, can I live with your family instead?
Can I come home with you instead?
Exactly. So
Like
when,
a lost puppy.
right, when the popular boy asks you, can I come live with you? And you're, 15, 16 years old. So I went home and fully expecting what my parents would say. I was like, can a cute German boy come live with us? No, okay. But instead of saying no, they were like, sure, why not? And a week later, he moved in with us. So
Amazing.
it was, and he's actually, we became brother and sister. We're still in contact today. He is absolutely family to me. But so he moved in with us, and so that was kind of my first step into German. Was we started. He would play his 1990s German hip hop, and I wanted to know what it was about, and so that's kind of when I started learning German. And then I subsequently, the summer after that, I went to, I don't know if you're familiar with the Concordia language villages in Minnesota.
No, tell me.
It's actually a really great program for, they have some adult programs, but it's specifically designed for, kids 6 to 18. It's a sleepaway camp and it's full immersion. They have, I think, 12 different languages. Most of the languages have like villages built to look like the country that it represents. So like I went to Waldsee. All of the camps, the name means lake in the woods in that language. So Waldsee, lake in the woods. And so it's built to look like a Southern German town with like the whole,
That's
Bavarian.
amazing.
Yeah, all of the cabins are built like that. When you arrive, so when you sign up, you get a fake passport in the mail and like a list of what you can and can't bring. When you arrive at the camp, you'll go through customs. They will take out any contraband, which, it's like candy because they don't want squirrels.
Yeah.
But then any English books, any English music, anything like that will be removed because it's a full immersion experience. You get a new name, everything, change your money for the local currency. It's fantastic. So I did 4 weeks at Waldsee in high school and went from, very beginning 1 year of high school German to essentially functionally fluent after 4 weeks. So yeah, it's a fantastic program. Yeah. So that's kind of the origin of my European languages. German ended up being it is my most fluent language, second language, if you will. I speak German at a near native level because I then in college I decided to major in German and went on to get a master's degree in German lit. The non-European languages, let's see, when did that start? So Mandarin would be the next language. And that was in college. I dated and later married for a period of time a man who spoke Mandarin as a mixture. You're a traveler, the Chinese mixture, but essentially Mandarin in the home. And so while I was doing my junior year abroad in Austria, I decided to surprise him and learn Mandarin. And so
As you do.
Exactly.
Just on a whim.
Some people bring home, roses or, brought home a language. So I was taking it, I was studying at the university there in Austria. And so I took my first Mandarin class was actually in German Mandarin. So I was having to convert the Mandarin into German and then the German into the English. And of course, eventually you get to the point where you don't need to make all the steps, but there were definitely times, my textbook was entirely in German. So there was a period of time where there were some things that I knew in Mandarin and I knew in German, but I didn't necessarily know the English translation for it.
Yeah.
So I learned that while studying abroad, came home, and in kind of like a fun experiment, I loved his family. I didn't tell them at first that I spoke Mandarin. I simply listened for about 6 months just to see what they were saying. And then after about 6 months, his mom one day was, speaking to him and said, "Is she hungry?" And I responded in Mandarin, "Yes, she is. She'd like a pizza." And the whole family just like, what? So
you didn't get any gossip, any dirty words or?
No, they were,
okay.
they're such a dear family. There was, just the usual, can you hand me the book? What would you like for dinner kind of conversations, nothing juicy. And then from there, let's see, was I started volunteering with the English immersion, was part of my university, like the kind of special branch just for people coming short term. And I became a language partner for a group of Japanese students. And I've always been fascinated by Japan, love Studio Ghibli, love, the anime. Not like I'm not
Mhm.
like a total Japanime kind of,
Mhm, mhm.
I never got into the deep
You don't sleep with
Dragon
the
Ball.
pillows, or you have the
Right,
posters on the
exactly.
walls or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. But I enjoy the Studio Ghibli movies. And so um I took that opportunity to start learning Japanese. I just took one semester of college and then put a pin in the Japanese. And so that one just kind of stayed for a long time. Um so that was kind of like I was actually stagnant with language growth for actually quite a while after that. And then whew, several years ago now. So about 2014, in 2014, while, I was kind of at a place, I was teaching in the United States. I had been teaching foreign language, German and French, and then also English. And, it was right post the 2008 recession. And, it was just kind of, I was at a crossroads where I needed something very different. And
Mhm.
so to kind of get out of my slump, I decided to take an internship doing photojournalism in Nepal. And so I was there for a summer working, doing photography and contributing for a small local magazine. And then at the end, I decided to trek to Everest Base Camp.
Wow.
And while on that trek, I met somebody who was teaching English in the Middle East. And so he's telling me about just kind of like how great it was, all their vacations, the pay, all the things. And I was like, why am I still sitting being unhappy
Why am
doing
I
so?
still sitting at Mount Everest base camp?
Fair point. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess
Sorry,
while
I
I was
gotta, I gotta, I gotta
at,
tease you about that one.
yeah. Yeah. In that moment, I definitely was
Okay.
celebrating, some awesomeness. But then when I returned home, I was like, I was substitute teaching
Mhm.
in a great district in Seattle, but I wasn't feeling fulfilled. And so I was like, I need to change. And so I accepted a job in Oman in the Middle East.
Beautiful.
And
In
yeah,
Muscat or?
outside of Muscat, about 2 hours south in the town of Sur.
Mhm.
Um, a fantastic experience. And so that was when I started with Arabic. And as I mentioned, Arabic has been my greatest challenge. It is grammatically more complex than
Yeah.
so many others. The
Arabic's like a
pronunciation,
level 5 language. They say it's one of the most difficult if you're coming from a native English speaking background, and
exactly,
there's not many other languages that are going to prepare you for it. Like I think that
exactly.
you mentioned Japanese, but if you had a basis in Mandarin, then
Hmm.
there might be some ways that that's going to help with the characters or the traditional and things like that. But Arabic,
Exactly.
I mean, you're out there alone.
A whole different ball game, right?
Yeah.
And
I
the
lived in the
problem,
Middle East for 8 years, so that's how
that's
I know,
right.
like.
Exactly. You've been there, you felt it. Yeah. And the difficulty, which I think you probably experienced as well in where you were, is those are expat countries. So we were there, we were hired to teach English. So we were
Mhm.
contractually bound to speak only English with our students.
Mhm.
Outside of school, we weren't generally encountering a lot of native Omanis in the
Sure.
restaurants, in the supermarkets. Those were guest workers from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan.
Yep.
Um, so I actually started learning more Hindi during that time than I did Arabic.
That's so interesting you say that, because I lived in Abu Dhabi, and I mean,
Mhm.
90% of the population are all expats. And a
Exactly.
third of those are Hindi speakers. I mean, whether
Hmm.
they're Hindi or Urdu, I mean, but this kind of region in the
Right.
world. And then Filipinos. I mean, just
Exactly.
tons and tons and tons of Filipinos. You are more likely to hear Tagalog on the street than you are Arabic living
Exactly.
in the UAE. And I think Oman is a little bit more local and traditional. Like the UAE is
Yeah.
really expat, really
Oh
expat.
yeah. Yeah. Like you said, they're like 90%. I think Oman was 40 or 50% when I lived there. And
Which
they
is still
were
huge compared to any other country in the world. But
oh, I
yeah.
know. Yeah. So it's, I did end up making a few native Omani friends,
Mhm.
one of whom remains a close friend to this day. And so she'll speak some Omani with me or something,
Right.
and I say Omani because that's the other challenge with Arabic is it's regionally very different from
Mhm.
country to country. So
Yeah.
so I made some progress then, and it's just been a long, slow, steady progress since then.
Mhm.
And then, so then, like I said, that's also the Hindi. I didn't start actively learning until that time, but it does go back. So my mother she grew up in Canada, and they did awesome trips for their school trips, but her senior trip, they took students for a month to India. And it was just such an amazing life-changing experience for her that I've grown up my whole life hearing about how great India is. And we've always said that we would take a trip to India together. And so like my favorite books as a kid were about India. Like it's just always been this place for me. And then now as an adult and while living in Oman, they had like one or two Western, like Hollywood films in the theater. And then the rest were Bollywood films.
Yeah,
So we
yeah,
got
for sure.
super addicted to Bollywood films. And so the Hindi came
Lots of
from
dancing.
I
Lots of
know, right?
dancing.
We loved it. Yes, like it was like $1 to go to the theater, and then for 3 hours, and you're dancing in the aisles, and
Mhm.
popcorn was 50 cents. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I had
So,
an Indian girlfriend for a few years and
mhm.
lots of dancing movies. Lots of
Yeah, exactly. Lots of good fun. Yeah. So that's kind of the origin story on all of them. I've also started Esperanto, trying to pick that one up.
Okay, actually, I'm going to be doing an entire episode just on Esperanto because I think that's so
Okay.
fascinating.
Yeah.
I need to find the right person. Maybe afterwards, if you know a good, famous person who can explain the concepts of Esperanto, because I
Mhm.
want to tackle Esperanto not only about the language, but also about the history of it and the
Right.
politics and the movement of it, because I think it's just so fascinating. And for
It
anyone who
really
doesn't
is.
understand, it is the most popular, what do they call it? Manufactured language
Yeah,
in the world?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was created it was meant to be the next universal language,
exactly,
and
exactly.
it's designed to be simple to acquire. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
And they build the words on top of one another. So you can actually have these huge strings of words. And the
exactly.
language is so organic that anyone can add to it.
Mhm.
It's like a Wikipedia of languages. It's so fascinating the way it's been done.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things that like, when in the polyglot community, it's like everyone just throws Esperanto in there because it's supposed to be so easy. And so,
Mhm.
I've heard this so many times, so I figured, okay, well, I should take a stab at it
Mhm,
just so I could
mhm.
confirm or deny. Is it
Yeah.
intuitive?
So opinions, give us the
Yeah,
dirt.
so far, it's I think as an English speaker, I was anticipating it to be a little more like romance language leaning
It's
for
more German based, isn't it? Like, well, I mean, it's
it's
supposed to be not
Eastern.
any based, but it's more of the,
Yeah, there's a lot of Eastern European influence in it,
okay.
which is great. It's still, but it's not, since I don't have any Eastern European languages in my
Hmm.
collection yet,
Hmm.
and I emphasize the word yet.
Hmm.
um, it's not necessarily as intuitive as it might have been if it was like though that group of languages seems like there is a smaller population who speak them. So I
Hmm.
feel like something that had more roots in one of the other more
Hmm.
widely spoken
That's
families.
interesting because for some reason in my brain, I thought it was a Germanic language. I didn't think it was, what would that be, like a Slavic language or something?
It's
Like,
yeah. Well, and to your point, it's meant to have aspects or elements of most of, I think. When I say most, it's definitely European oriented.
for sure.
I'm not seeing any elements that derive from like Mandarin or Swahili necessarily in there, but yeah, it's not difficult. It's definitely not a difficult language, but it's the words are not as intuitive as I necessarily predicted they would be, just because they have more of that Slavic infusion in them.
Well, if anyone who's listening today has a background in Esperanto or knows the person that I should be interviewing to discuss Esperanto language, then go to expatmoneyforum.com and start a thread on there and let's get this going. Because I think this is super fascinating. And for
Hmm.
the implications for being an expat and if there was a global language, what that would look like for communities, and community building, which is one of my hobbies at the moment, is looking how people organize themselves and in smaller areas, and the laws and the things that come from that, whether that be, you know, monetization and commerce through Bitcoin. I mean, I see Esperanto as possibly being the Bitcoin of the language world, except it's been going for 100, 150 years, and it's still a few 100,000 speakers, not several millions or tens of millions.
The argument I often hear is that why do we need a universal language when we have English? But then the counter argument I often hear is any of the, you know, right now English does remain the universal language. I've heard a lot of people saying that Mandarin is going to creep up and replace English before too long here. But in both cases, there are political undertones to that. English is the universal language because of colonialism. There's no, you know, for better or worse, that's just the facts. That's how it happened. Something like Esperanto would not have that
exactly. It puts everybody on an even keel. I mean,
right.
It's so different when you are forcing someone to speak in your native language and it's their secondary language. Even if they're very good at it, there's differences. It's a different power structure, which I think is really fascinating to study and to understand. I digress. I want to get back into the subject at hand because I'll go on a giant tangent about this because I think it's super interesting. But okay, so really fascinating about the languages that you acquired. Now, here's my next question. Do you have children or children at the moment?
Child.
Yeah, child, perfect. Okay. You have a child at the moment, and now you are helping your child to learn languages.
Right.
With your expertise and your many, many years of studying languages, I'm really curious the methods that you think are best, quote unquote, for a child to acquire a language.
So yeah, I'll start with what I use and have used for my daughter. So she is, I don't use her given name publicly. I just call her Baby Lion, or now she's not a baby anymore, so we just call her Little Lion. So on all of my media, people will see her reference to as Little Lion. That's kind of until she's old enough to give me the permission herself. That's what I use.
There's no pictures of my kids up on the internet. I know I don't say the names of my kids either. I mean, it's a privacy thing for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So with Little Lion, what I've done from birth, so for the first 6 months, I used all 8 of the languages in rotation, 2 days at a time. And so what that looked like is realistically in those first months, you're not using a huge pool of vocabulary. There are really a limited number of phrases that you're saying with these kids. Are you hungry? Are you sleepy? Do you need a diaper change, etc. So for 2 days, I would speak English. Then the next 2 days, I would speak, Mandarin, 2 days Japanese, rotating through. It was a little more difficult to stay entirely in those languages for, like I said, my weaker languages. Arabic and Hindi are my weakest of the languages. In those cases, I had those list of the super common phrases. I knew those phrases. And then, if I needed to slip, she's, about to, something spontaneous, she's going to fall, if I need to switch to English, so be it. As long as those target phrases are in the target language. And I did that so that she was hearing those languages and structures from the beginning. And then I was constantly reading to her. So when she was sleeping, when she was just kind of there, I was always reading my novels out loud to her. And I was reading novels in different languages. So I had a German novel, I had a French novel, a Spanish novel, a Mandarin novel, etc. So I just, anytime we were still and she was resting or playing quietly near me, I was reading out loud from a novel, which I did for 2 reasons. One, to hear that fluid flow of language in the target language. And then the other reason was because I was modeling reading from an early age to her. She's playing independently, she sees mommy reading. So we did that for about the first 6 months when it's just exposure. She's not going to say her first word at 3 months anyway. So then once she got to be about 7 months old, and particularly at that point she went to school, I had to go back to work. And so she went to daycare. So at that point, she began getting all the English she needed from the community, from, from school, from grandma and grandpa, etc. So from then on, because I wanted to develop stronger language skills, I speak with her 75% of the time in German. And so that's essentially mommy's language. The other 20, so I would say then 20% of the time is I rotate through a language of the month or different languages. And this isn't, there's no science to this. It's not like I'm not measuring time or anything like that. But so at that point, I did drop the Hindi and Arabic for her because she's gotten some exposure. And we now live in a community that is very, very heavily, I would say our community is at least 50% from India. So she can get the Hindi from the neighborhood as well. But so then the other languages, the Mandarin, Japanese, French, and Spanish, I'm rotating through with her in smaller doses. And then the remaining 5%, I do speak English with her, about 5% of the time because she's a toddler and I'm a human, and staying in a non-native language when somebody's throwing a temper tantrum or, when she's got 102 fever, it's not worth it. And so that's kind of the first point that I talk about with clients is that there is no perfect. Because I feel like that is one thing that prevents people from giving their children the gift of bilingualism or multilingualism is because they're like, well, this is the best way to do it and I'm not able to do this. Or, I want them to speak Spanish, but my Spanish isn't fluent. Who cares? We are humans. Every little bit is a gift to their language abilities. So yeah, I make sure to tell clients that I do not do any kind of like perfect routine. I absolutely slip into English. If I've had a bad day, we've gone through some challenges here. It's okay. It's super
because
okay.
if you start beating yourself up about not being perfect, well, then you're not going to be motivated to continue. And when things get tough, then, you're just going to think it's not worth it. But it's like,
Exactly.
no, actually, you can keep showing up every single day and do your best you can for that day. I get that completely. I think that's something to be said about parenthood in general.
Right. It's hard.
It's hard. There's no doubt.
Yeah. So at home she gets those, mostly German and then the other languages. So she's now she's about to be 18 months. And so she, one of the most frequent questions or not even questions, I get comments that I've gotten from people, oh, you're ruining your child. She'll be delayed in language. So she is on par or more verbal than her peers. So that debunks that myth right there. As far as understanding, she has demonstrated that she understands equally English and German, and pretty much, most of what we say. Obviously, if I start speaking at like a PhD level, your average adult might not understand some of those words.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if you say, go get your shoes, which book would you like to read? The basic conversation stuff that a child would engage with, she will give the correct response. She will perform the correct action in both German and English. With the other 4 main languages, particularly Mandarin and French, she was demonstrating understanding with a more limited context. So usually the context around like her favorite board books and stuff, animals, clothing pieces, that sort of thing. She understands in multiple languages. As far as spoken words go, she's at about 40 or 50 spoken words. She has 5 more a day right now. We're in that really exciting period where they just start exploding with their languages. In the beginning, I would say about 50% of the words were cognates between the main languages, which makes sense because she's going to be hearing that.
Maybe just explain to the listeners what a cognate is.
What a cognate is, yeah. So a cognate is a word that is going to either be exactly the same or look or sound the same between 2 languages. So an example would be her first word was Buch, which is the German word for book, but they sound exactly the same. They're spelled differently, but this book, it's the same word essentially. So her favorite word right now is shoe, which is again the same between the two languages. So English
this is your best friend when you're trying to learn Spanish, because if
exactly.
you don't know the word, you just say the English word and then you just add a Spanish flair to the end of it, and
Right.
like chances are you got it correct.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, on the flip side, there are a few false cognates between languages, which we're having a few issues with. Not issues, but I can tell that they confuse her a little bit. But an example would be like in English, the word gift. In German, the word gift means poison. So you definitely don't want to give somebody a gift in German. So there are a few things that would be confusing, but as far as the words go, so most are cognates. Where they're non-cognates, she does have a few more English because she's spending all day with her peers in school, and then German. And she has a few that are like mixed between the languages. So like her word for bubbles that she used the other day was pow pow bowls, because the Mandarin word for bubbles is pow pow. So she is mixing some of those up, but that's very normal, and that self-corrects with time. So her favorite books and nursery rhymes, her favorite TV show is Chupi, which is a French cartoon. Her favorite books are in Japanese for the most part. So she's very comfortable in all of them, and is not in any way linguistically delayed, which is one of the most common myths with multilingual children.
Okay, so I love how purposeful you are and how you've thought this through. I want to kind of share with you some of my ideas, and then you critique the hell out of them. Okay, you tell me this is good, this is bad, this is I don't know. So all right, so some context for you. So I'm Canadian, native English speaker, of course. My wife is from mainland China. So since day one, we have two children. With my daughter, well, actually with my son too. My son is only, he's very, very young, he's a newborn baby. But my wife speaks only in Mandarin with our children. Like 99.99% in Mandarin. And even if we're sitting at the dinner table together, and like my wife will speak to me in English, then turn around and speak to our kids in Mandarin. Like she is amazing with this. She doesn't just join in the conversation and switch to English. She's very, very, very good about it. So I would say that my daughter, especially in the beginning, her Mandarin was actually better than her English, because my wife was the one who was spending the most amount of time with her. Also, my daughter has been to China 5 times now, and each time for 2 months at a time. So spent a lot of time with Waipua and Waigong, and they speak only Mandarin. So English and Chinese are completely normal and natural. Now we live in Panama, which is obviously a Spanish-speaking country. We now have a nanny who doesn't live with us, but works 9 to 5 type of thing in the house. And she just takes care of my daughter like 100% of the time, and speaks only in Spanish to her, nothing else, because she doesn't speak anything else. There's no other additional languages there. And although my wife does speak, like my wife speaks Korean as well, she's not bothered with Korean. We speak a little bit of Arabic. We know some Arabic because we lived there for so many years, but we haven't bothered with anything like that. But the idea was, okay, she's 5 years old right now. She speaks Mandarin, English, and Spanish all fluently. And then we're going to be adding one language, probably one language a year for the next several years. So at the moment, we're in Brazil. My son was just born here in Brazil, so I have a Brazilian child. And we're going to move to Brazil in maybe 1 or 2 years. So then we will start learning Portuguese, and I study Spanish every single day. So hopefully it'll be a +1 for me as well. And my daughter will be at 4 languages, and then maybe my son will be, I don't know, working on his first or second. So that's kind of like from the human aspect. Then, I mean, some people will listen to this and hate me for it, but my daughter does watch quite a bit of cartoons. Once again, I'm human. Sorry, everyone. I know that, TV and tablets and phones and stuff are not good for kids. However, saying that, my daughter does watch cartoons, but we changed the languages of her Netflix and Disney Plus and all of these to either Mandarin or to Spanish. So she gets no English input at all. And then the only English she gets is from me or from my mother who lives with us, her grandmother. So that's kind of our structure. And then we're thinking, so Portuguese next year, and then maybe Russian or Arabic the year after. That's what we got going on.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's, basically, so what I tell clients is that there is no right, I guess there's no wrong way. You use what you've got. But if I could describe an ideal situation, you've just described it, basically.
Cool.
You've got,
awesome.
So the first thing, we'll touch on the first thing that you mentioned, is probably the most famous approach to multilingual parenting, and that's called OPAL, one parent, one language. And so that's
OP.
OPOL, one parent, one language.
Okay, so it's an acronym for.
Yeah, one person, one language, I guess is what the probably the more diplomatic way is. But so what
don't worry about PC on this show. I mean, that's not how we roll. So
so yeah, you've described where your wife is only in Mandarin and you are bringing the English content. So that's ideal for the first layer, the bilingual layer. And then you have the excellent situation of being in a different, your community language is a third language. So right there, that's an automatic trilingual setup.
Well, so let's pause on that, because what happened for the first 2 years is my daughter would go to the park, she'd go to the pool, she would try to make friends, and they're all Panamanians, they all speak Spanish, and my daughter was just not keeping up. I mean, she started to not want to play with the other kids because she couldn't understand. So we're like, all right, the community is not working. So that's when we went out of our way and hired a nanny. Because truth be told, we didn't actually need a nanny. I mean, I work from home. My wife is a stay-at-home mom, and my mother lives with us. So, I mean, she has 3 people in the house already to look after her and spend time with her. And but we hired a nanny as well, just so that she could get massive amounts of Spanish input. And that has taken her in a very short period of time from not being able to speak Spanish to actually now quite fluent. And now she's able to make friends. And it's like she has to be on a certain level, I think, to really get the most out of those types of relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And and you exactly listed the next recommendation that, if a client, if there are 2 parents that are monolingual and they want to add another language that they don't have fluently, and I use this one myself. My Mandarin is decent, but it's not native speaker, and I would love it if she actually had that native speaker input. So with my daughter, I have her babysitter is a native Mandarin speaker, and and so I did ask her, and when I was interviewing babysitters, I made it clear that the language was of interest to me and that she should only use that language. And more importantly, if somebody listening is looking to use this approach, and it sounds like it worked, the one that you found worked, you cannot find a nanny, like a babysitter, who speaks that language and just tell them only speak that language. They have to understand that especially with the young ones, they have to basically narrate everything. You're not hiring them for babysitting. Like you said, you don't need the babysitting aspect of it. You need the language input. So while they're sitting there playing, blocks or dolls, whatever they're doing, and they're not just there watching the child's safety. They need to be saying, oh, look, the doll is wearing shoes. The shoes are pink and the doll has a hat. These blocks are very low, well, when that is, the next best thing. And then, so and then the next thing I wanted to touch on was I am with you on the screen time. In an ideal world, sure, something. And I've actually seen a few studies come out that the previous anti-screen time studies are somewhat biased. Now, do you want your kids in front of the TV 24 hours a day? No, obviously not.
Certainly not.
They should be going out and playing and doing other things. However, some exposure to screen time is absolutely, from my expert
it's magic.
opinion,
like, I mean, if there's any parents out there, I mean, you give your kid the tablet, it is magic. If you want to see
Mhm.
Harry Potter in real life, like, I mean, your child is so fussy, so upset, can't get him to sit still, can't get him to focus,
Mhm.
and just making life so challenging when you're out at the restaurant. Give him that tablet. It's like
Mhm.
it's just
It's
unbelievable.
it really is. It makes all the difference. Now, uh, mine got exposed to Cocomelon, which I don't know if you're familiar, but
No, I
it's
don't know
English
that one.
nursery.
Okay.
It's people either love or hate Cocomelon, but it's English because my policy was exactly the same as yours, where
Mhm,
the screen time can be an advantage, an educational input
mhm,
when it's all in the other language. So, for example, um, when she watches Disney German. If they don't have a German option, it's French. So
mhm,
she associates Disney with German or French, if not German. So we do all of them in different languages.
mhm.
However, Cocomelon's only in English. She saw it somewhere and she will demand Cocomelon. So I'm
Mhm.
like, ah. Um,
For ours, it's Elsia and Anya. It's a YouTube channel that is a play off of the movie Frozen, and they have like
mm,
little dolls, and it's in
mhm,
English, and my
mhm,
kid just goes nuts for watching
mhm.
these teenage girls play with dolls and make up voices,
Right.
and just
Yeah. And that's that when you can find one that they resonate with though in the target language. So like I said, right now, my daughter's favorite cartoon when I can not have Cocomelon on is Choupie, which is a French cartoon. And so they get attached to that character. And so she
Mhm,
knows that Choupie speaks French. And so that is natural language input. And I'll tell you, somebody who is excellent at this approach, there is, you can find her on Instagram under the handle of Polyglot Mama. And she is amazing. She has a daughter who is 4 who speaks 14 languages.
what?
Yeah, it's amazing. She recently, you can see
I
her
barely get through on English. Like, how does
it's pretty impressive. And she'll speak sometime at like the polyglot gathering type events. And they're in, I think currently still they're in Siberia. So it's not like it's in a super international community either.
Mhm, mhm,
But one of her main approaches is that her daughter associates characters with languages. So Peppa Pig for them speaks, I think for them it's Greek. In our household, Peppa speaks Mandarin. So when
yeah,
you watch
Papa speaks in our house Mandarin. Yeah, Peppa speaks
yeah,
Mandarin.
exactly. So, and that's the thing with these, you don't necessarily have to,
And
just
Pocoyo speaks Spanish. That one's for sure. I know
oh,
that
sure.
one.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't have to Peppa, as many parents will know, is British. So this is
Mhm,
Peppa in theory speaks English, but so many of these, if you go to YouTube, they're all out there dubbed in other languages. And
mhm,
so
mhm,
you can find, or like you said, Netflix, Disney Plus, the languages can be changed. So
mhm. Yeah,
that is a
you can
great
actually
approach.
change the tablet. So
Hmm.
all the programs that come up will come in that language. So even when you're not watching and your kid's swiping through the different programs,
Hmm.
they're only going to keep getting that same language. And my daughter hasn't figured out how to change the settings, and she's not going
Right.
to listen to this episode. So it's
Exactly. Will you buy yourself a few more years with that one?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah,
So
that's a great
so
approach.
sorry. So you pick different programs, or I suppose your child picks programs that they like, and you
Hmm.
make sure each of the programs that they like is in a different language. So you could do,
Hmm.
if they liked 4 different programs, every one of the programs could be a different language, and they associate with that language, and then it's to be expected that
Hmm.
Peppa is going to speak Mandarin and Bokoyo is
Exactly.
going to speak Spanish in this
Exactly.
example.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
So
really think about that until you say it, but then that's why I chimed in, was like, oh yeah, and this one speaks this and this one speaks that. How that
exactly.
ended up happening, I have no idea, because I know both of those shows are in English, but we don't
Right.
listen to them in English. I think maybe we downloaded them from Pirate Bay. I'm going to incriminate
Mm.
myself here. I think we
We've
downloaded
all
them
been there.
from Pirate. I'm human. Come on, guys.
That's right.
Downloaded them, and so it wasn't changing the application. It was, I
Sure.
had them on a thumb drive. We plugged it into the USB, and she just watched those programs on repeat.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And eventually they'll just associate. And, and like I said, the example of the woman in the polyglot mama in
Mhm.
Siberia, I think she told me once that her daughter would find it strange if all of a sudden Peppa started speaking English or something,
Mhm, mhm,
because
mhm.
that's the character's language. And so, it's a great way to continue to work, like I said. So I speak mostly German, but when I want
Mhm.
to incorporate those other languages, she still, if I'm cooking dinner, she gets that, 30 minutes of screen time, and she does get to choose to a certain extent. I mean, she's a toddler, and there's only, I don't want the Coco Melon has many great advantages, but it's in English, so
Mhm.
it's not useful to me. So I have to sometimes suggest, strongly
Mhm.
suggest we're going to watch
Mhm.
Studio
Mhm.
Ghibli, and then that's in Japanese.
Mhm.
And so and she'll get pulled into Ponyo, like, oh, what's this going to be about? So she's getting the language exposure, every day. She's getting, in addition to the English and the German, she's getting those other secondary languages through the shows, through the board books. I do not choose the board books for her. It doesn't matter what language I'm working on or what language we're focusing on. She chooses the board books every night, and we read at least 3 times a day. We read in the morning when she wakes up, in the evening right before bed, and then usually sometime like in the especially on weekends during the midday.
Amazing.
She loves books. She'll gravitate towards them, and she chooses her favorites. And sometimes it's going to be in Spanish, sometimes it's
Mhm.
going to be in Mandarin. It's just really her mood. So that's kind of how we incorporate the other secondary languages on a more consistent basis.
We get a lot of Pete the cat. When your
Mm.
child's a little bit older, look for Pete the cat. My kid
Uh-huh.
just goes nuts out. She just grabs
Oh,
stacks
sure.
of Pete the cat books and brings home. They're in English, so I read them to her, but
Sure.
they're to help with reading, and they have many different levels. I
Hmm.
think they're the most boring books in the whole wide world. But God, she just loves these things. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's fun
Okay,
with
so
it.
I want to make a point though about what you were saying earlier about the nanny speaking in the different language, because this is what ended up happening. I'll give you a real life example. 4 months ago, we came to Brazil to give birth here, to deliver here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when my mother hired the nanny to help with my daughter with
Mm-hmm.
Spanish because she wasn't getting enough Spanish. And my mother told her, oh, you need to teach her Spanish. This is just a normal Colombian woman, domestic help who works in the house. She's not a professional
Mm-hmm.
teacher. So
Sure.
what does she think she needs to do? She needs to teach, like
Mm-hmm.
correct and explain and
Mm-hmm.
all of these things of the language. I don't blame her. I mean, that's, kind of what she was told, or in her mind, that's what she was supposed to do. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'd talk to my daughter at night and she would be in a terrible mood. She was hiding in the bedroom. She was
Mm.
very upset. She didn't want to talk. She was like, I don't like her. I don't like her. And I was like, I couldn't figure out what was going on. So I talked to my mother about it. And she says, well, she doesn't understand, and this woman, she doesn't speak English, so she can't try to communicate in any other way. And she's trying to teach her Spanish. And I was like, whoa, wait a second. She's trying to teach her Spanish? She's like, yeah. Isn't that what we want? I'm like, no, that's not what we want. What we want is a friend for my daughter who can also keep an eye on her, make sure she doesn't get into trouble, and play with her in that language. So I think that anyone who's listening today, I mean, don't let it cross the line if you have a nanny. Yes, what you were describing, okay, the block is pink, Dolly's hair is yellow or blonde, or I mean, these types of things is one thing, but no, that's wrong. Your pronunciation, it's supposed to be said like this, is actually not conducive to a learning environment. It's non-constructive, I would say.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is key. You do have to find the right person, because, another question I often get is, and I can't speak to this one yet. I get the question of, will they rebel at some point? And if that's in my answer to that is, I don't know yet. She's too young. If that happens, we're done. This is a gift to her. It's not an obligation. I'm not going to force her to speak languages. But there are a couple of reasons why children start to dislike language acquisition. One of them is because they feel othered. If she's the only kid, and in so many cases that I hear that it's generally like the parent is an immigrant parent and they're in an English dominant community.
Sure.
The kid doesn't want to feel othered, which is unfortunate, but it's a normal thing, and there are ways around that. The other one, however, is when it becomes a chore, when it's not fun, and that's kind of what you're describing. Is this is the individual is making the child feel smaller or less than, which we don't want. So it has to be done as play, like we said, narrating, not correcting, never correcting. And so that's one thing that, I would tell a nanny, an au pair, whoever you do have in your home, is there's no correcting. You can, so as some of this comes from teaching, I've taught foreign language in schools as well. If a student pronounces it incorrectly when I'm teaching, I do not say, no, that's wrong. I simply repeat it correctly. I don't even say, do you mean, if they said, I'm trying to think of an example, Guten Tag in German, and they said Guten Tag, I wouldn't say, you mean Guten Tag. I would just repeat it correctly. I just say it correctly, Guten Tag. They will get it eventually, especially the younger the child, the more they're just going to eventually get it. It just gets in there. So if somebody is bringing in like a nanny or a caregiver, an au pair into their home, that's one thing to make clear with them. They're not teaching, they're not correcting, they're simply modeling and narrating. And that's all we need from them.
And literally, like, I had a conversation with my mom, lasted 5 minutes. The very next day, she spoke to the nanny, and all the problems disappeared literally that day. Like, it was like, it wasn't like, oh my goodness, we have to go out there and get another nanny or something like that. No, it was like, just explain to her exactly what you just said, and the problem solved itself. And now they're like BFF. And it's just awesome to watch.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there's, the younger you start them. So another thing that I want when clients come to me, they're like, oh, I've started too late. Can I do this? There's never too late. But that said, with this approach, the younger you start them with a non-native or a different language speaking caregiver, the easier, because my daughter was, I think, 9 months old when she started with her Mandarin caregiver, she can just speak in Mandarin, and my daughter's never going to know the difference. She's just going to incorporate it the same way she does other languages. Now, if you're bringing in a nanny that's a new language at 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, it is going to be harder, like you said, with your daughter on the playground. She already knows a different language, so she understands that the language she's hearing is not her language. So that is a little bit more of a challenge. So the older you get with a new language caregiver, then the more you want it to be associated with a play, like some sort of activity that they want to do, so that they want that person to come over. Because even though the challenge of that language barrier exists, they want that person over there because there's something special in it for them. So another great example of a polyglot parenting, and I'm gonna forget their last name, but you can Google Bella the polyglot 8-year, I think she's 8, 9, something like that. Just really amazing little Russian girl who has spoken, I think she's up to like 8 languages now, something like that. And her mother said that one of her approaches is that when this child wants to learn a new activity, let's say riding horses, so you could find a class or training, an instructor who speaks the language that you're interested in, and then everything about that is done in that language. So that gives them a motivation and excitement that Arabic is associated with riding horses, and I want to learn the Arabic words because that's what I associate with the riding horses. So you want to, especially the older they get, the more it needs to be attached to something interesting for them. It can't ever be a learning. You're not going to sit your kid down with a textbook and be like, let's learn French now.
That makes sense. I'm already starting to run through things in my head and try to figure this out for my own family. I always have my own selfish reasons for having my guests on. I'm like, Sarah, what you do is amazing. You want to come on my show? I'm going to ask you 500 questions about your work because I think this is so rad.
No, well, and I enjoy sharing it because I feel like, especially as we become more interconnected globally, we've got to be multilingual, and
Yeah.
starting young is just the easiest way to do it. And
I
so
know I get these people who are like, oh, travel is so easy now. You just use Google Translate for everything. I'm like, no, like, don't do that.
oh, it's
I
so
mean,
bad.
if there's anything, you should be using the new abilities of technology to make language acquisition easier on yourself,
Mhm.
not relying on the technology to do it for you. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah. So, but that actually does touch on kind of the next suggestion I do have for families is, at the very least, you can use programs. Like, like I was saying, you want to attach it to something fun. So ideally, if you have a kid who's really interested in learning cooking, and you can find somebody who speaks, French or Italian or Hindi while they cook, that's the way to do it, is make it attached to some hobby. But things like Duolingo are gamified. So it has to have that game aspect to it. It has to be something fun. So yeah, you can absolutely use Rosetta Stone, Duolingo, any of those programs,
mhm.
but it's
Well,
not as good.
I think my listeners know how I feel about both of those programs. An alternative would be to go to expatmoneyshow.com/language and check out my buddy Ollie Richards' programs, who
Oh, sure.
is amazing and does
Yeah,
story learning, and
he does.
his stuff is really, really good. A very, very dear friend of mine, and I am fully
Yeah.
drank the Kool-Aid with him and his
Oh,
method of
absolutely.
teaching languages.
Yeah, Ollie's approach is 100% dead on with the reading approach. And
Exactly.
again, as a teacher, I always have to point out, one reason some people aren't successful in language learning is because we're assuming that we're all the same as learners and we all need the same things.
For sure.
And people need to first understand who they are as a learner before they can understand which program or which approach is going to resonate with them the best. For me, I'm a verbal learner, and reading is 100% the best way to do it. And Ollie's approach of starting right off the bat with these beginning texts that he
Mhm.
has created for so many different languages, it's and the sense of accomplishment when you finish one of the beginning, not like, who cares that it's a
No,
super cheesy, easy beginner novel? You're like, I
for
just
sure.
read a book in Japanese.
Yeah,
Woohoo!
like full stop. Like
Right.
like it is a proper 200-page book. I mean, I've gone
Yeah.
through a number of them in Spanish, and
Mhm.
his programs and stuff like that. I mean, that's like literally sense of accomplishment. I
Oh,
mean,
sure.
and
Yeah.
I think that that is so important. If you can celebrate wins along the way, and this is
Mhm.
getting maybe away from the child aspect, but probably not. I mean, if the child can celebrate wins and feel like they're
Mhm.
accomplishing something, then it's probably going to motivate. But I know
Mhm.
for sure in me learning Spanish, as I'm able to do new things in my target language, the more
Mhm.
motivation I have. It's like
Mhm.
the more I want to do. Now
Exactly.
my Spanish is getting to the point where I'm like, I think next year I'm going to start learning Portuguese. And I
Mhm.
studied Mandarin for many years in the past, and
Mhm.
my Mandarin is terrible. I mean, I've been married to a Chinese woman for 6 years, and my Mandarin should be at a completely different level, but it's not. But that's okay, because there's still an opportunity, and now I have the motivation to try
Mhm.
again and try to get it a lot better.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and you touch on something really important there. All of the myths about language learning, just completely bust them.
Yeah.
None of them are true. It's all about mindset and shifting your mindset.
Mhm.
So the wins is huge. It's the same, the other half of kind of what I do is goal achievement coaching, which language acquisition coaching is goal achievement coaching, just a super specific niche of it. You set the
Mhm.
goal to learn a language. Um, in everything, you have to have those micro steps that you can celebrate wins for,
Mhm.
because otherwise you're just feeling, you know, especially with languages, so many people don't want to take that risk because they don't want to sound stupid.
Mhm.
And when you can have that, I read the book, I understood the song, I ordered the food, those moments are so key. So yeah, celebrate those micro wins. Absolutely.
Mhm. I think it's really, really important, because it can be so frustrating when you're learning a language and you think that you should get it in a certain way. There are
Hmm.
things that come extremely natural to me,
Hmm.
and my background as being a high school dropout and having dyslexia and being told that I will never learn another language and we're not even going to bother teaching you another language because you have so many problems with English, that I had so much baggage going into language learning. And I mean, it's like, if I can get through this, literally anybody can get through this stuff. So for me, celebrating the wins and the accomplishments along the way has been paramount in keeping my motivation going. And I study every single day. I studied every day except for probably the 3 days that we were in the hospital for my son's birth. I mean, I've studied Spanish every day while I've been in Brazil. I mean, like, it's just a piece by piece thing, and I just show up and show up and show up and show up. And yeah, I think that that's the way to do it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it's language learning is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And you have to be able to continuously re-enroll yourself because you're not going to become 100% fluent overnight. You know, there are definitely programs that say fluent in X, Y, Z days. You know, sure, it's possible, depending on what your definition. You know, we've already talked about, you know, what is fluency, but you have to set goals. You have to know why you're learning that language. You have to be invested. You know, we were talking about ground the kids, anchor the kids in some sort of activity for them, but that's equally true for adults. You have to have something that lights up your passion with that language if you're genuinely going to learn it. Now, there's the argument for functionality. You know, if you're living in a country and, you know, yes, you need to be able to order dinner or whatever, that's only going to take you so far though, because it's a long road and you need to have
I have
something.
lots of friends who are expats who lived in Panama 3 times as long as I have friends 5, 6, 7 years there. They can order their dinner and they can fill up a tank of gas. Not much more than that. I mean,
Exactly.
You know, that's like they got to just the bare minimum to survive in the country, and then they never went further. I've been there 2 years and I went from crummy Spanish to fluent because of my goals that I had set for myself from the beginning.
Exactly.
So,
they have to be specific. And so I talk about the SMART goals, the specific, measurable,
attainable.
achievable. Yeah.
Achievable. Okay.
So there's, those ones, they kind of, the A's and the R's, they're different ones. I think SMART, specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound is the one that I most often use. And because, you know, you get those people, well, I can't learn a language. I had the New Year's resolution to learn French, and every year I never accomplished it. Okay, well, what does it mean to learn French? I'm not done learning English, right?
Yeah.
So we have to have, specific goals and things that excite you. And that could be, so, you know, I do a lot of home mini immersions, you know, so like I'll say this weekend is Japanese weekend. And I'm only going to learn, or I'm only going to use Japanese as much as possible. But then in addition to that, I fill my days with things that represent Japan and Japanese that get me excited. Now, as I'm a passionate traveler, so just kind of the notion of having a little hint of travel in my house is enough to get me excited. But some people, it might be, you know, I had a friend who really wanted to learn Greek, and particularly ancient Greek, because they were very devoutly religious and wanted to be able to read religious texts in their original language. And so it could be as simple as something like that. It could be, you know, you really want to connect with your Italian grandmother or something like that. It's something that you get excited, like you get that kind of like cool feeling and you're just like, it's like, wow, cool when you're thinking about it, because you just have to be excited and interested. Otherwise it's just going to be memorizing verb forms and, you know, trying to figure out what order the words go in, and it's just, you're not going to progress.
Well, this is our plan for homeschooling, and you'll probably get a kick out of this because it's so similar of what you've just described. So my wife and I, for our daughter, we follow basically a version of unschooling or homeschooling, or I guess it's affectionately named world schooling. So we teach our daughter as we travel around the world. And she's not quite 5, she's almost 5. And she's been to 13 different countries. And what our plan is going forwards is that as we're teaching her things, teaching once again in quotation marks, we will do that like country specific. So say we want to do Japanese, then we'll prepare Japanese food in the house and we'll watch Japanese movies and we'll learn about the language. And then we'll plan a trip to Japan and then we'll go spend like 2 months in Japan or something like that. And so like, yes, she's learning reading and writing and things like that. Yes, she's learning cooking and skills. Yes, we have entertainment, but it's all in kind of that cultural aspect of that language. And then we want to do a trip there. So that's what we've got planned for the next couple of years of trips that we want to do. In learning about those types of things. And I think that that's going to be really amazing now as my daughter gets a little bit older. When she traveled to, I mean, I took her to Egypt when she was like 1 or something like that. Okay, I mean, she's not going to remember anything, I mean, from that. But, you know, when we do another trip like that and she's 7 and we learn about the history of the pyramids and ancient aliens. No, I'm just joking. But all of that kind of stuff, like, I think that'll be really cool as like a project for a couple of months. So you've kind of described it on the adult level and I've kind of described it on the kids level, but a mixture of that I think is really neat.
Absolutely. And your description of, and I would call it world schooling as well. That's amazing. That's 100% what I had kind of hoped to do. And who knows, I might still be able to pull it off. Right now I'm kind of trying to figure out logistically, as a single mom, it's a little difficult to, you know, homeschool and earn money at the same time. And so I'm trying to figure out logistically, but I absolutely believe that it is possible when you set that goal. That's what I would love to do, is create, because you can create the full curriculum in those contexts. I mean, think about your trip to Egypt. You can incorporate, let's say right then, she's also her outcomes for that age include geometry, right? Think about how you can teach geometry in context using architecture or something. Everywhere you go, you can absolutely make the entire curriculum incorporated into what she's experiencing in the real world. And that is going to land so much more securely than sitting in a classroom looking at a textbook. So the more that you can do that, the better. I absolutely believe in the power of world schooling. And, you know, again, I know for some people it's more or less possible. But even if you are the kind of person who feels like you are bound to staying in a traditional setting, which is absolutely the case for some people, you can still, like you said, plan trips. Schooling does not end. If your child has to be in a traditional school, it doesn't end when the bell rings. And that's, we did kind of a study among some of my colleagues several years ago, and we discovered that every one of us who was on one of the higher end stipend or scholarships at this college, every single one of us was either homeschooled or their parents created additional schooling opportunities outside of school. So yeah, the schooling does not have to stay in the classroom. And ideally, when you have that opportunity, if it can be done entirely outside of the classroom, it's going to resonate so much more powerfully. That's awesome.
And then to your point about, you know, geometry or mathematics, I always have believed that the best way to teach these things is not in theory. Teach these things in practical sense. The fact that public schools teach math but don't talk about money, for me, is so weird. Like, it's like, what is the most common use of arithmetic in everyday life that you're using it at every moment? I mean, it's so applicable, is commerce. And
absolutely, yeah.
It's like banned. Like, it's absolutely banned. You cannot talk about money in public schools, how it works, how it functions, how to make it, how to multiply it, how to lose it, how interest works. I mean, it's just so weird.
I agree, because that was one of the things that I felt was really lacking from my own education. And I went to what would have been a good school, you know, like no shade thrown at my high school and my middle school experience. I thought they were great at the time. But to your point, it just wasn't considered a priority. It wasn't something that we thought to teach. Now, I know when I taught in the Edmonds School District of Seattle, that they now, I think Seattle wide has the requirement for graduation that they have to take a personal finance class, which is a great step in the right direction.
That is definitely a step in the right direction. Absolutely.
Yeah. But to your point, I had been teaching, so in one of my teaching careers, I taught for Bellevue College outside of Seattle, adult basic education, which is adults who are returning to school. They didn't finish high school for whatever reason. And so they're taking high school equivalency type classes. And I taught the basically the arithmetic level math class. And I built my curriculum around that very thing, because it's not, especially for adults who've got jobs and families, they've got other things, they're not interested in sitting in a classroom anymore. This needs to be relevant to their life. And so I changed it to exactly what you said. We did banking. We did, how do you balance, I don't know if we balance checkbooks very much anymore, but
yeah, but there's a basis for basic, accounting. I mean, it's accounting on a personal level. So
right, sales tax, how to calculate sales tax, all of those number issues that can make or break your financial well-being. It's so important. I fully agree.
Then for your kids, what an opportunity to be able to do these types of lessons or classes in a different language. I mean, one of the things that, I don't struggle with my numbers in Spanish anymore, but I mean, when I used to have to do dates in Spanish, like, 4-digit numbers, or you're doing telephone numbers, or you're doing things like this, having that type of repetition and using abstract numbers in a different language, I mean, you need a lot of practice with that. Like, I've traveled to more than 100 countries. And when I'm in a country and I'm at the market and I'm trying to buy something and I have to, figure out how much something costs, and then give them that amount of money and then count my change and see if it's correct. And you're doing it in colones or yuan or AED dirhams. I mean, like you need a lot of practice with those types of things, with the different types of currency. So you might as well try to double up with your child's education and do the language learning in that type of thing, opposed to like, hey, we got 60 minutes for learning French and then 60 minutes for doing math. Why don't you just do like 2 hours just of, add it all together and, don't call it a lesson. And I mean, we got like little stores set up at my house for my daughter. She's got like her toy store and we put price tags on them. And now she's got a cash register and then she has to give us change. And we do it in different language. Like my wife does it in Mandarin with her. And I mean, that's how we're teaching her math, and we're teaching in another language.
Absolutely.
Today. I mean, that's what we're doing right now. It'll work.
Right now.
Yeah.
So that's perfect. Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And it's like you said, that basic number, that language skill. One of my early internships in college was in Switzerland, and so I did a supermarket internship, and I was at the cash register for a good part of the internship, speaking. So some of the, as I'm sure you're aware, in France, you've got all those language, or Switzerland, you've got all those languages just kind of mixed up. And so some customers would come in and speak Swiss German, some would come in and speak German, standard German, and someone would be coming in and speaking French. Occasionally you get like an Italian speaker, and some of them would mix them up. and so like I'd be trying to, like, just the amount that my language skills grew from, doing the, and similarly, some were paying in euro and some were paying in Swiss franc, most in Swiss franc. But so just the calculations, the conversions, the numbers that you have going in your head. And then in that case, it was the higher urgency of my till needed to balance at the end of the day, or I was going to be in trouble. So I needed to be darn sure.
We don't need you in a Swiss prison, geez.
So that's a great high pressure way to learn your language, your numbers, and your currency vocabulary. So yeah,
because I find with the numbers stuff, it is so different than just normal conversational language acquisition. I mean, yeah, you can sit down and have a talk about the weather or maybe ask for directions or something like that. But I mean, if people are lined up behind you to buy something and they're waiting on you to get through this stuff, it's like, you want to be a gun on this. You want to be super fast. You want to know your numbers. And like, it's just such a different experience, but very, very valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you have any other tips from the children's side of things that you have seen work well, or things that you've read about or studied that you're working with now with your clients that helping their children become multilingual?
I would say that the biggest thing to take away is that there's no one best approach, and most likely you are going to need to use a combination of approaches, much exactly like you described with your situation. You've got the one parent, one language, you've got the additional caregiver, you have, all of these different aspects, the Netflix, the TV, the screen time in a different language. It's going to be a combination of those things. And then the second thing that I really stress is, like we said, you are going to fall off the bandwagon at some point, most likely. It's all going to fall apart at least once a month, probably. Things are just going to happen, and that's okay. It's just the most important thing is the ability to re-enroll yourself and your family. Keep it light, keep it fun. Do not make it a chore. And remember that any language takeaway is going to advantage your child later. If they don't become fluent in all of the languages, or even the second language, that's okay. It's their choice. And later, consistently, pretty much to a person, when I speak to people who grew up in a multilingual environment and rebelled against it at some point, I can't think of a single individual I've talked to who then didn't regret that they didn't finish it and try to come back to it. So you're never going to have a kid who's going to like grow up and be like, you know what, you tried to make me learn 2 extra languages. I hate you. Yeah, so anything you can do to get that start, if it doesn't go all the way, anything you can do is a gift to their future language abilities.
I think that with the homeschooling, I don't think that a lot of people will have, I don't think a lot of children will have that same aspect, because my hunch is that the child goes to school and they start to feel different, that they're learning other languages and all of the kids are only speaking English. So, it's kind of a waste. Why are they going to spend this time? They just want to play with their friends and all the friends are in English. I think with the homeschooling, that's not the case. And also with the expat families, that's not the case. Because like in my daughter's example, she goes to the playground, they're not speaking English. None of them are speaking English. They don't know 2 words of English strung together. They're only speaking Spanish. So it's like, it's going to be a built-in motivation where expat families and homeschool families and this alternative education that we discussed so many times on the show, I think it's going to be a very different situation.
Exactly. I fully agree. And that is, studies do show that North America, I want to say North Americans, so Americans and US Americans and Canadians are the areas most likely to be monolingual. So you're 100% right. Children who are in the US or Canadian educational systems where everyone else is speaking English are the ones more likely to rebel. Outside of the US, if you're living as in an expat community or elsewhere, you're right. It's the norm. They're less likely to rebel against those languages, because why would they? It is very much about that being different thing. And so, and in a lot of places, I can't speak to Canada, Quebec is obviously a different situation in Canada, but in the United States, I know it is increasingly common. So if a listener is in the United States and wants to avoid that, so if I do remain in the US, which I'd love to get back out on the road and give my daughter the opportunity to experience the expat life. If, however, we are here, where we're based in Minneapolis, there are a dozen full immersion preschools and 4 charter schools that are entirely immersion as well. So if you have those opportunities, then absolutely send them to any of them. It doesn't matter if it's, if you started in a different language, maybe you started off in your child is learning Hindi, but you want to keep them learning languages, send them to the Mandarin immersion school, because as long as they're in that context of multilingualism is the norm, they're going to keep appreciating any of the languages you feed to them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. The more you can normalize it, I think the better off you are. And like my daughter's best friend, they're a Russian family. She was born in New Zealand. Now they live in Panama. And the parents knew the benefit of Mandarin, so they've had a Mandarin speaking tutor. So the girl's like 7 and she speaks 4 languages right now fluently at all times. That's my daughter's closest friend. So like my daughter sees that and she sees this girl's speaking to her parents in Russian, which my daughter doesn't speak. So it's another language that it's like, oh, this is normal for people to speak multiple languages. When the child seems to think that they're alienated or it's this bizarre thing that's not normal, I think that's when a lot of the problems start to come into play. That's my instinct on it.
Exactly. Yeah. And you touch on something else interesting as well. It's that it's the child's natural curiosity. So in the example that you've mentioned, your daughter seeing somebody that she really appreciates, admires, speak Russian, probably has her interest in Russian a little bit piqued,
For sure.
So the more, wherever we are in the world, the more that we can diversify our friend set, the people around us that our children are exposed to, the more likely they are to get curious about that. When they hear people that they think are cool speaking that language, they're going to be like, ooh, what's that about? Let's talk more about that.
So do you have any insights then on when a family should be adding additional languages to the mix? Like I know you started in one way, which is like a lot of languages from basically day one. What about for a family like ours that's trilingual? And like mine was always going to do the +1, like 1 a year, 1 every 2 years. Do you have any insights on I hate to use the word best, but I mean, an effective way of doing this? Or do you have any of the studies or have you read anything or what's your insights on this?
Sure. So in my case, the reason that I chose to approach it that way was, they do generally say that the sounds and the structures that a child hears before 2 are most easy for them to replicate later in life. So for example, when we think about like working with tutoring Japanese students in English, anyone who's tutored Japanese students in English will know that Japanese students have an incredibly difficult time differentiating between the R sounds and the L sounds in English. It's almost impossible. Things like that occur because languages happen at different pitches. And so when we're under the age of 2, our ears and our brains are more open to absorbing all of them. But as we age, our brains narrow in on, okay, this is the set that I need. And the other stuff is not necessary. So after a certain age, you do become it's increasingly difficult, not necessarily impossible, but it's increasingly difficult to hear the sounds to be able to replicate them. So I wanted to expose her to as many things as possible at a young age, so that her brain was like, okay, these are out there. These are things to listen for. Now, and again, that's why, for example, with Arabic and Hindi, where my language skills aren't as strong, was that effective? I don't know, because my accent might not have been replicating all of the pitches that I can't hear because I started as an adult. But I know it didn't hurt her. So I tried to expose her early. And then after that initial exposure, once she started actually acquiring language, when she was in the phase where she was actively trying to associate meaning with words, then I narrowed in and spent more time focusing on specific languages. Now, as far as adding languages, and really this is the same, I would say probably for kids or an adult, the first thing is interest. Don't add a new language unless you're ready and excited to learn the new language. So that's the first ground level. The second rule of thumb is don't add until you know that you can step away from the last language and focus on the new language and not completely lose the previous language. So you have to be strong enough in that language that you don't need to practice it every day for a while. So now, and again, that's going to go more quickly. There's going to be, you can have a shorter, so your plan of adding 1 a year is a very reasonable plan. I've seen a lot of families do that approach. And children are amazing sponges. They absolutely your daughter and in the future, your son will be able to do that and probably won't lose much. What they do lose will come back quickly.
Mhm.
With adults, again, everyone's different, but it might be, I would say 1 a year among the polyglot community is probably, I would say that's probably a reasonable rate for
Mhm,
adults
mhm.
as well. But again, it just depends. Each individual knows themselves. The last time you worked on your freshest language, do you feel strong enough that you could take a month off, let's say, and come back to it and still have the same knowledge retained?
Mhm.
If so, yeah, you're ready. Go ahead and add another one.
Okay, that makes sense. That just reminded me. So one time when my daughter went back to China, it was without us. I can't remember what we were doing. I think we were actually moving from the UAE to Panama, and we needed to pack all the house. We had to do all this immigration. We had to close all this stuff down. So we took my daughter to China and left her with my wife's parents, my daughter's grandparents. I think she was there for about 3 months. So it was 3 months of Mandarin, 24 hours a day, zero English, except for when daddy calls on the video call or something like that. And when we went back to China to pick her up 3 months later, my wife had to translate for my daughter, for me, because my daughter would speak only in Mandarin to me. And my wife had to then translate because she had, like, quote unquote, forgot how to speak English. It lasted about 2 weeks, probably.
Mhm.
And then everything came back and everything was as it was. But that first 1 to 2 weeks, it was like she had forgot English. It was like it disappeared. And then she couldn't even communicate. She would only speak to me in Mandarin because she didn't understand. She was at that age.
Mhm.
But the English came back so fast that it's like she didn't really forget it. I mean, it was certainly in her brain. Like you could
Absolutely.
say she went from, otherwise you would be able to say like she went from not speaking English to fluent in English in 2 weeks. So it's like, well,
Right.
that's not really how it works.
Yeah.
Really how it works.
Yeah. Anytime you're coming out of so like in your normal life, as you said, she's shifting between languages regularly. So her brain is used to what we call code switching. She knows that in this
Code
context, I
switching.
use this
Okay.
language and this. However, in that situation you described, in which she had returned to China and it was a rich monolingual situation. She was
Mhm.
only using the one. So she had kind of gotten out of the habit of code switching. And that's the case for anyone. When certainly when I was a teenager and I went to the German immersion camp for a month that I mentioned, my English was obviously, especially at that point, just light years stronger than my German.
Yeah.
But because I had been in that situation, which even more than had I traveled in Germany, in that context, we were forbidden from using English.
Mhm.
So it took, like, the week after I came home, it took me, like, I had to physically or, specifically remind myself to speak in English, because when you're in a concentrated immersion monolingual situation, your brain is no longer used to code switching back and forth, and it takes
Interesting.
a minute to switch back.
That is really interesting. It's just I find all of this everything to do with languages in my life now is just so super fascinating, and especially for the child aspect as a parent now, because I will be very honest, I want my daughter to grow up and speak 6, 8 languages. I think that
Sure.
is the coolest thing on planet Earth and
Mhm.
just so super rad. And I mean, I want to do that too. I mean, I'm working on it one at a time. It's going to take me a long time, but I'm working on learning more languages as an adult. I feel like this is an absolute gift. A gift that I can give my child is speaking multiple languages. Like it's like the I don't know how else to put it, because that is what I'm doing. I mean, spending extra time and effort and energy and money to do all of these types of things. I just think it's and I believe that she will appreciate it in the future. I think so.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I love that you use the word gift, because that's what it is. And I think shifting it from the idea of gift to, away from, some people think of it as the obligation,
Mhm.
because, like I said, I've never met an adult who did not appreciate their multilingual exposure as a child. So yeah, the more that you can do, and I'm with you. Like I've said, if my daughter at any point that she says stop, we're done, we're done. But absolutely, do I want her to be, the multilingual polyglot? Yes, because that's the world we're shifting into. That's what it's going to look like today. So.
Absolutely. I guess, okay, before we wrap up, any insights on you, and I have my own opinion and I'll reserve them this very one time, at least until after you go, on the learning of languages and which languages you should encourage your child to learn. Okay, I understand that there's interest, but for people like us who travel extensively or who are expats or want to live in expat or an international life, what's your opinions on languages that are going to be most beneficial in life?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are a couple of different caveats there. It depends on what you're learning the languages for. If you are looking to add languages that give you the most bang for your buck as far as speaking to people in the world, I would say Mandarin and Spanish, followed by probably Hindi would be the ones that give you the most traction as far as like number of people you can now communicate with.
Okay, so I'm going to interrupt you as we go. With Hindi, do you not think that there are so many Indians who speak English that like there's just a massive amount of secondary language speakers, and that language is in English? So if you're coming from English, you might already be able to tap a lot of that market?
Yeah, absolutely. So in that sense, and again, Hindi is a unique one. I don't know that there's such a thing as an exclusive Hindi speaker. However, when in language learning for a native English speaker, the argument could easily be made, well, everyone speaks English. So if you're looking to communicate with a number of people, you're done.
Fair enough, but try traveling through China and only speaking English.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Been
again,
there, done that, not fun.
Yeah, and in those three, yeah, Spanish and Mandarin are going to be absolutely the more, if you have to pick one of those three, I would say Spanish or Mandarin. Yeah. Hindi has a large number of speakers. To your point, they do, even an exclusive quote unquote Hindi speaker is probably mixing English in. Anyone who watches Bollywood is like, wow, I've suddenly become fluent in Hindi.
Those cognitives, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that one's going to be less useful as far as like cracking open an opportunity that you wouldn't have already had in communication. In that case, I would say it's not a necessity. So that's why that category is just in terms of people who speak those languages. It's not a necessity for me. When I travel, I learn the language to show respect. They probably already speak English in a lot of cases, but if I show up at their doorstep, I'm going to try to speak their language. Just, because if somebody came to my house and started, ranting in a language I didn't know and expecting me to understand it, I'd be like, shut off, man. Like, get out of here. So I consider it a matter of respect. So in terms of if you want to be respectful to the greatest number of people, I would pick one of those languages because they are the widest spoken languages. Now, if your goal is something different, say if your goal is business, then you would want to focus on, I would say, Mandarin is still a good one. German is, Germany is the economic hub of Europe. So Germany is a great one there. Arabic is a good one, although that's a little more complicated because of the regional differences. And then Portuguese is, and Korean. Those are kind of the big business ones as well. If you are wanting to choose a language based on ease, like if you're wanting to acquire languages rapid fire, then I would start with a Romance language. If you're a native English speaker, I would start with a Spanish probably, and then from there you can add an Italian or a French, and then jump into something a little. Once you've got kind of the rhythm of language learning, you can jump into something further afield. If you are looking to just add languages for fun and you're looking for ease and you've only spoken English, I would not start necessarily with Japanese if you're just randomly picking a language. Now, again, because I encourage people to have a passion, a why, it's like I call it the why, know your why, then there's going to be a little less randomness to that. So if your why is you are just absolutely in love with Japanime and you only speak English, absolutely start with Japanese, because the passion is going to drive you. But if you just want to learn, if you just want to be a polyglot and you don't have a specific why yet, then I would say look at those factors.
I will say that I agree with you on German, because my prediction is that German will become more and more and more important in the future for commerce. I think that when we look not just at Germany, but at the neighboring countries that are also, German speaking, Swiss German and Austria and Liechtenstein and all these places, I think that there's just more and more money that is running through these districts. And that if you are speaking German, especially to a high level, I think that that is going to have huge advantages to you as an adult throughout your career. I 100% agree with that. And then for your points about Portuguese, actually something that I didn't realize before I came down here to Brazil, there's as many Portuguese speakers in South America as there are Spanish speakers. So one country makes up the other however many countries in South America combined in amount of language speakers. And anybody who tells you that you can just get by with Spanish in Brazil is an absolute liar. And my listeners have heard me say this for the last 2 months now in every one of my episodes, because this is what I thought. I've been to now, this is my 5th time in Brazil. However, this is my first time coming in as a fluent Spanish speaker. And I just thought that, oh yeah, I'm going to understand people and it will be fine and I'll be able to speak Spanish with them. And because there's so much Spanish influence, there is not Spanish influence here. The Brazilians are Brazilians. They influence. They're not influence. It's so different than what I expected. So
absolutely. Yeah. Well, and if you think of the fact that Brazil is one of the BRICS countries, the rising economies, it's a powerhouse in itself.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not what I expected. And I guess I should have known better. Like I said, this is my 5th time here, but I listened to others who just told me, Spanish, you'll be fine. Everything will be fine. Portuguese and Spanish, same. Not the same.
Absolutely.
Not the same. Yeah. I will also make one other point on Arabic. We lived in the Middle East for 8 years. We could have stayed in the Middle East. We had the option. I actually purposefully left. And one of the reasons was that for my daughter, I thought it would be more advantageous for her to learn Spanish than Arabic, because I know what the cultures are like. And for a woman to get ahead in an Arabic culture is still a lot more difficult than it is for a woman in a Latin American country to get ahead. They're not the same. And you guys can listen to this and call me a giant bigot or a racist, but I'm seriously just trying to be practical here. I mean, realistic. Like, it's just the way it is. And I'm not saying anything bad about Middle Eastern countries or Arabic society. Actually, I love them. I think it's super fascinating. That's why I spent 8 years of my life there. And I've traveled extensively through the regions. But what I had seen in my day-to-day life is that for a woman to get ahead in those societies, it was a lot more challenging than a woman getting ahead in a Latino community. And that was one of the reasons we moved to Panama, because I thought it would be more beneficial. If my daughter, do I think it's great for my daughter to speak Arabic? Yeah, definitely. Gulf Arabic, classical Arabic, sure. That'd be awesome. I'd be super proud of her, and I would love to go and spend more time there. But if you're comparing it against other languages, no, Spanish, bang for buck, as you said, is just an excellent way to go, I think.
It's going to take her further. Yeah. And, contributing to that, I lived in Oman for about, just under 2 years. Loved it. I love the country of Oman. I have such an emotional attachment to it. It was an amazing experience. And I did purposely go for the point of trying to bust some of the myths. But but I was a single female living in Oman, and I absolutely encountered challenges that my male colleagues didn't encounter. Whether that's right, wrong, otherwise it's irrelevant. It's simply
Exactly.
the
And
fact.
that's my point. I'm not making a judgment on, I'm not bashing them. I'm just telling you, hey, this is what I experienced, what I saw while I was there.
Yeah. There was one incident that I remember. They have police checks on the road periodically, not because it was a very safe. People thought that I was in danger in Oman, and
people used to think that I lived in Baghdad. I mean, I tell people I lived in the Middle East or I lived in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and they're like, "Oh my God, is it safe there?" Like,
right, exactly.
You're in the States. Are you joking me?
Right? As a teacher, the month before I moved to Oman, there were 4 school shootings in my area alone. That's not an issue in Oman. I was so much safer as a teacher in Oman. But, so there was a police stop, and I had in my car, I was the one driving. And then as a passenger was my ex-boyfriend. And he was an ex at the time. We were not, in a relationship at the time. And so the officer came over, rolled down the window, and he says to me, "Salam alaikum." And I responded, "Wa alaikum salam." Yep. "Salam alaikum." And I responded, "Wa alaikum salam." Like, I'm saying the answer. And he still did not acknowledge. He said it a third time. And so finally, my ex leaned over and responded, "Wa alaikum salam." And then the conversation could proceed, because he would not respond to me. And he wasn't trying to be condescending. In his experience, the officer's experience, it would be inappropriate for him to engage in the conversation without the permission or the acknowledgement.
That's true. That's legit. I mean, you don't start a conversation with a female in these types of instances. You just don't. I mean, it's actually considered disrespectful. So what he was doing in his mind with his perspective was showing respect, was not being disrespectable. That's a lot of people won't get that, but for sure.
Yeah. So I wasn't at no point was I offended. At first I couldn't understand. I was like, am I saying it wrong? What is not working here? And then finally it was actually, the ex who realized what was happening, thankfully, and jumped in to move the process along. So it was more amusing. But yeah, it is a very different perspective on gender roles in the Middle East. And it is not what we're used to as women. And that was probably the reason, because I had a good job situation there. It wasn't easy. I mean, I think I worked like 10 hours a week and then went to the beach. It was fantastic. But as a single female, the challenges can be distinct. We'll just say they're definitely there. And so that's one of the reasons I moved on to my next experience. And so, I fully intend to bring my daughter to visit. We'll visit regularly. But yeah, it would not be an accurate conversation if we didn't acknowledge that there were those challenges for women in that area, for sure.
Okay, amazing. Well, it's good to get your insights on these things as well. And I think that in this regard, we're in all regards in this conversation, we're very aligned in the way that we think and how we think about these things. But it's interesting because as I want to learn more languages, or I dream about learning languages, these are goals for me that I just think are so amazing. And then being able to, live a little vicariously through my kids. I mean, let's be honest, I think all parents do this. What would help my kids the most through their life? Like being practical on learning languages. If she had some love affair and wanted to learn Welsh, okay, cool, great. Is that really going to practically help her on a wide spectrum of situations? No, I'm sorry, unless she's going to get a Welsh partner, or live there, Probably not.
Right.
I mean, so I would never tell my child, oh, you can't do something. I mean, I would just try to steer them like, you know, why don't we look at this instead? Like if you're listening to this episode and you're going, oh, I don't know what language I should introduce to my child. Well, Mandarin is like what, 1.4 billion people on planet Earth. And you got
Right.
450 million native Spanish speakers.
Right.
Like, I mean, and you got like 7 Welsh speakers or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Don't hate on me. I'm just teasing. But I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's just not the same. So I'm always trying to figure out what are the things. And it, like I said, with the Hindi, I don't think it has to be just a pure mathematics numbers games on how many people speak that language. It's going to be, you know, in business going forwards or places that you would go to, like Swahili, like millions of people speak Swahili. However, a lot of those people also speak English. Like I got lots of friends from Kenya. When I lived in the UAE, some of my best friends were Kenyan. They were native English speakers. They spoke Swahili as their second language. So it wasn't, to communicate with that group of people, you didn't actually need to speak that language.
Exactly. Yeah. Particularly countries that are Commonwealth countries, you're going to have that English, obviously, as intertwined. Even to your point, Swahili is one of the languages that I have started, and it's an interest for me because I really love Kenya. But again, it's
beautiful. So beautiful.
Yeah, that's one that I can't wait to show my daughter. And that's the thing, like all of this is because I want to show it to her. Like I want to share all these things with her. Like I'm like, oh, I can't wait to take you to see this. And you know, hopefully she's not like, and I don't think she's already proving to be kind of quite the adventurer. So hopefully she's not like she hits 5 and she's like, you know, I really hate travel. I just want to sit home. I
want a white picket fence and a dog and gardening.
But so I've started Swahili, and it's a fun language. It's an easier language. But you're right. The Swahili speakers are likely to speak English as an equal bilingual language or even a first language over Swahili, which, you know, is what it is. But it's not necessary. It's not a language that's going to give you, to your point, like a lot of advantageous mileage out of it. It's a respect language, an interest language, but not a, you know, you're not going to make this business deal unless you speak Swahili.
Exactly. Well, like when we left the UAE, we were looking at different countries to move to. And one of my favorite countries in the world is Thailand. I'm a celiac. I can't eat wheat. And if I go out in Thailand, I can eat everything. Anything and everything, because they basically don't use wheat in their food. True. So we've done many trips to Thailand over the years because it's just really, really easy on me. They had a visa we could get. We looked at all of those types of things. And Panama also has a very easy visa. So we're weighing them and we're like, but our kid growing up to speak Thai, what is that going to do for her in the future as an adult? I was like, well, I mean, yeah, it'd be cool to learn. Sounds neat, and she'd have Thai friends. But once again, comparing that to Spanish, that's a monster of a language with just so much applicable use and content and music and culture, and you know, that spans continents. And it's like, it's just night and day, I mean, between the two, at least in my mind.
If you are, you know, as an expat, if you're making decisions based on things like what's going to be most advantageous for my child, 100%, a Spanish speaking country, you know, Mandarin, one of those. And I lived in Thailand for 6 months, loved it. Amazing. It was beautiful. So and I, again, can't wait to go back. Can't wait to take my daughter, all those things. But you'll notice that Thai is not one of the 8 languages that I count. I learned enough, would love to learn more. It's absolutely on my radar in the future, but it just doesn't have the mileage that something like a Spanish or a Mandarin, or even, like you said, you know, Thai, your point about German, in addition to that, you know, thinking, now, of course, we can't predict what's going to happen in 18 years down the line, or even 10 years. Sure, we can for fun.
That's part of my job, but
right now.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Affectionately predict probably guess is a much better word, but yeah.
Hypothesize.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. At the moment, the German higher education, the college system is completely free to non-Germans, even to non-EU members.
Oh, wow.
So my daughter growing up fluent in German, that opens up an excellent free college opportunity for her. So it's those sorts of things that we want to think about, is when we're thinking about what languages they want to learn, or they should learn, exactly where are they going to get the mileage? Where are they going to get the use?
Well, that also circles back to our point at the very beginning when we were talking about Esperanto, about the political nature of language. That's the first time I've ever heard that. But my guess is that Germany does that because they want to strengthen their position in the European Union and have more and more things done in taking place in the German language. And that's why they offer these types of things for free. So that is a political movement. I'm not saying it's good, bad, right, wrong. I'm just acknowledging it for what it is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's key, because so much today is polarized in conversations, but we can acknowledge that something is politicized without having to make a judgment call or a polarized, decision about it. Everything is politicized when you really look at it.
Exactly.
And, it makes good sense to think about who's driving this decision and where it's.
Well, listen, I'm libertarian. I get to offend both sides. I get to offend everybody. That is where I live. Amazing. Sarah, I love today's conversation. Super interesting. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wealth of knowledge and your stories about language. So super amazing. I just love it. If my listeners want to find out more about what you do, if they want to get a hold of you, if they want to engage you to help their families to sort through all of this and get the insights one-on-one, where can we send them?
Yeah. So there's kind of two umbrellas. And so obviously the most relevant here is the language coaching. And that is found on my website is Polyglot and Taught. That's Polyglot is POLYGLOT and AND Taught TOT.
Okay, now spell it in Mandarin, German, French.
All of the different languages. Yeah.
That's a great name for a website, by the way. I really like that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So, and then that's also my Insta handle for that content. So, anyone looking for tips on, like my stories generally talk about, okay, right now it's Arabic focus month. What am I doing to learn Arabic? What am I doing to expose my daughter? That sort of thing. So, and then my bigger presence where I'm more active is on chooseyourlifeadventure.com. All one word, and similarly Insta is Choose Your Life Adventure on Instagram, and that's that encompasses some of the language. I do post some of the language content, and then that's also my travel and goal achievement brand over there. So yeah, so I'm active on both, but for language specific content and to find out more about like language coaching or language events, I do some free webinars sometimes and that sort of thing. That's on Polyglot and Taught.
Polyglot and Taught. And I will make sure I have the links for these at expatmoneyshow.com under Sarah's episode. Sarah, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. And I know I kept you much longer than I promised you, but it's just, every time languages, my people know I just geek out on this stuff.
I've had a great time too. So it's been a pleasure.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.